CB Cebulski promised a lot when they announced a J.J. Abrams-led Spider-Man story. All Marvel delivers is a bastardized version of Peter Parker in the most forgettable Spidey comic in some time. So I can't really review J.J. Abrams and Henry Abrams' Spider-Man without acknowledging the horrendous marketing effort preceding the release. Marvel EIC CB Cebulski began touting a huge Spidey announcement on social media with a countdown clock. Spider-Man fans got caught up in the hype, speculating Marvel was going to publish Sam Raimi's never finished Spider-Man 4 sequel in comic format, or like a huge Fantastic Four crossover event. There were a lot of theories. Fans were juiced to the gills to learn the details until they were ultimately disappointed to learn nepotism was the word of the day. The big Spidey news was Hollywood powerhouse J.J. Abrams and his son Henry were writing a Spider-Man miniseries together. CB Cebulski and Marvel were mocked and derided for hyping such a non-event. I myself was pretty disappointed in the news, but I still expected a quality Spider-Man story in the end. After reading the first issue of Abrams Family Spider-Man, my expectations are thoroughly subverted. This is one of the most boring, tired, cliché takes on the character in some time, and it doesn't help that Chip Zdarsky and Mark Bagley's Spider-Man life story just finished up portraying a similar take on Peter Parker, at least in the latter half of the story, in superior fashion. And honestly, I couldn't wait for that story to end once Peter became bitter with age. I'm not sure why Marvel keeps pushing these deconstructed takes on Peter Parker. After it's been done once, the cat's out of the bag and it's just tiresome and quite frankly lame. There's nothing inspired in the pages of Abrams Family Spider-Man. The art is lacking, the characterization is dreadful, and it's filled to the brim with bad dialogue. Not surprising given J.J. Abrams' history of rebooting movie franchises like Star Trek and Star Wars by hollowing out most of what made them great to begin with. Oh, and that new big bad Cadaverous, barely in the comic, and not the least bit interesting. They don't even take the time to give the villain motivation or purpose. He's just there for initial shock value. Needless to say, I don't recommend reading this comic. It sucks pretty badly. Now let's get into all the abysmal details that make Abrams Family Spider-Man a disappointing failure in today's comic book review. I'm not the world's biggest SARA Pichelli fan to begin with, but she's certainly a very talented artist with a good eye for details and emotes characters very well. The opening scene is a good example of why the art in this comic falls short. Pichelli lays down some good pencil work in this comic, but the inks are way too soft. And I'm not sure who decided to pair color artist Dave Stewart with Pichelli on a Spider-Man comic, but it was an awful choice. His decision to use a very subdued color palette don't fit the character or setting, and it does nothing but sink the overall quality of the visuals. The opening confrontation with the new villain Cadaverous feels thoroughly lifeless. The visuals are extremely flat, and it renders what's supposed to be an invigorating action scene rather dull. Just look at Peter's face in the bottom right panel. He looks as dead as I felt reading this comic. I don't want to beat a dead horse, but Marvel did SARA Pichelli no favors with her graphic partners on Spider-Man #1. She lays a solid foundation with her pencils, but is failed by the inker and colorist. I rate the art 2 out of 5. The solicitations claim J.J. and Henry Abrams' Spider-Man is the most shocking and incredible comic of 2019, and ask, what do they have planned for Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson? The answer is, father and son Abrams go the gimmicky shock value route by killing off MJ in the 3rd or 4th page in the comic. This despite solicitations for the first 3 issues of the series promoting her heavily. Why did Cadaverous kill Peter's wife? Why does he lay waste to the streets of New York? It's not really discussed, and the new villain in the book was also heavily promoted with only appears in 1 more page later. He's apparently some schlub in a suit or a cyborg of some type, with his wife preserved in his living room, similar to Batman's Dr. Freeze. 2 of the 3 characters this series was marketed heavily on are throwaway characters in this issue. MJ literally gets thrown away off the side of her bridge like a sack of garbage. At the funeral, we learn MJ and Peter had a young son named Ben who just lost his mom, and Peter appears very despondent. The comic then fast forwards 12 years in the future, and we see young Ben Parker getting ready for school. He even finds time to cook a delicious looking breakfast for Aunt May before he heads to class. When Ben arrives at school, we see he's dealing with much the same issues as his father growing up. An enormous bully has a nerd pinned against a wall. It is making him piss himself. Ben tells him to leave him alone before sending the gigantic young man through a door. It appears young Ben Parker has inherited a bit of his father's penchant for standing up to bullies and spider-infused strength. The principal chastises Ben for saving a 90-pound weakling from what appeared to be a near 200-pound giant, and apparently he's been doing it a lot lately. Peter then arrives to pick up his son, and the comic falls completely apart. Guess what Peter Parker Spider-Man would do if he lost a hand and his wife in a life-and-death battle and had to raise his son on his own? According to the Abrams, he would turn into a giant piece of crap, abandon his son, who is his last connection to MJ, with his Aunt May, and stop protecting people. This lame, broken version of an older Peter Parker has been done to death. It's not original at all, and it's not Peter Parker. If J.J. Abrams wanted to write a story about a hero who lost everything, and in turn gave up everything, including his family, why not create a new character? Peter Parker is one of the most resilient heroes in the history of fiction. His first love was murdered in front of him, and you know what happened? He eventually dusted himself off and started saving people again. Peter Parker is no quitter. He doesn't give up on himself. He doesn't abandon his family when times get rough. Spider-Man doesn't orphan his son. Peter Parker doesn't yell at his child for standing up to bullies and helping a fellow student in need. He takes the lessons he learned from Uncle Ben and teaches his son how to do it better next time. This isn't Peter Parker, and that's ultimately why this comic book is a complete failure. After deadbeat Parker does nothing to help his son through his exceptionally relatable personal crisis, Ben returns to school, and wouldn't you know it, he meets the generic tough girl of his dreams. Everything from the character's look, her initial dismissal of Ben, and the cringy dialogue between the two brings an already meandering comic story to a grinding halt. Just listen to this conversation about their teacher. How the hell can a teacher be such an explicitly sexist dirtbag and not be reprimanded? Mr. Foster talks about women like they're things, his things he touches. Administration does nothing, but not me. I'm not sure what world J.J. and Henry Abrams are living in, but here in the real world, a mere accusation of this manner would get a teacher suspended and investigated immediately. Besides that, it's terrible dialogue between two people who've never met. Strangers don't talk like this. Would you want to hang out with this person if this was your first interaction? Of course not. But here's Ben Parker experiencing puppy love for generic, feminist, teen angster number 4. In the end, Aunt May tries to talk to Peter about Ben, but he honestly could give a crap about his son. He's all but left him parentless. Ben has a nightmare and wakes up attached to the ceiling when Aunt May walks in. She's not alarmed because she's lived through this exact same story with Peter as a child. She leads Ben to the attic and a box of his father's most personal keepsakes. Stashed in the bottom is a tattered and torn Spider-Man uniform waiting to be discovered. J.J. and Henry Abrams have no feel for the Peter Parker character. I don't know if this is character assassination, it's been done before, but it's certainly character abuse on the part of the Abrams. Every other new player introduced, most especially Ben, is cliché, paint by numbers, formulaic. The only character that's recognizable is Aunt May, and that's just not enough. I rate the characterization 1 out of 5. Outside the opening sequence when Mary Jane, one of the characters heavily featured in the comic promotion, dies, little else interesting happens. I rate this mostly slice of life plot 2 out of 5. The marketing for Abrams Family Spider-Man is a complete mess. The countdown clock promising a huge announcement didn't go over well at all. Most people don't respond favorably to nepotism, but the marketing following it was probably even worse. The comic was sold on 3 characters, Mary Jane, new villain Cadaverous, and Peter Parker. Mary Jane is killed off within the first few pages. Cadaverous is only in a handful of pages himself, he has no motivation to speak of, and is easily forgettable. The story features a deconstructed version of Peter Parker, who is a crappy, absentee father. The pencils from artist SARA Pichellli are solid, but everything else from the soft inks and color palette to the bland and boring story torpedo her efforts. I rate Spider-Man number 1, 2 out of 5 overall. This isn't a good comic book by any means, and I don't recommend it to anyone, but the staunchest J.J. Abrams fanboys who will certainly defend this terrible comic book to the bitter end. C.B. Cebulski promised a lot when they announced a J.J. Abrams-led Spider-Man story. All Marvel delivers is a bastardized version of Peter Parker in the most forgettable Spidey comic in some time. The only good news is this comic isn't in continuity, so everything about it can be flushed down the memory hole like it never existed, right where it belongs. Not everything that glitters is gold at Marvel Comics right now. Stick to X-Men and Absolute Carnage, and you'll have a much better Marvel Comics reading experience. This book sucks. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. I would appreciate it very much. It helps us attract more views for the channel. Subscribe for future commentary, comic book news, and reviews. And don't forget to ring the bell for notifications. If you want to talk comics, movies, and much, much more, you can follow me on Twitter at Wes_from_TC. With that, Salamat Po, and I'm out.